Wait for it to get connected. All right. I think we're live. All right. So, welcome. What is up, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of Afterlife Apologetics. First off, let me deeply apologize, everybody. I know I messed up Steve's audio last week, but today we are good. I checked it. I was a little out of practice, but we should be good to go today. What we talked about last week will continue into this week, which is this. Last week we spoke about how we ideally would like to see nurses, pastors, and even potentially friends that are having people they know have near-death experiences. We wanted to talk about last week how those people should interact with them, how they should help these people who are experiencing near-death experiences feel supported, feel heard, and kind of help them explore through it. And today we want to take more of the personal route of, if you have had a near-death experience, what are some things that you are going to need to work through? What are some of the things that those who have out there who have these experiences, what do they talk about are the let's say post obstacles that they're dealing with after these experiences? And so we'll get into that conversation today. And without further ado, I'm joined with my lovely Steve co-host. And you've never been described as lovely, but now you have. So
I don't recall.
all right. So without further,
Always knew I was. I just didn't know why no one else noticed.
I'm just bringing it to life for you, Steve. You're so lovely. Okay. So without it, let's get into the front side of things, Steve.
Sure. Um, I mentioned that when I was in college, I had what I felt like was a negative visionary experience, something that might have been an attack of the evil one in the middle of the night. I was studying for the ministry, going about trying to serve God, trying to do the right thing. And I had this very vivid dream in the middle of the night, like Satan was attacking me. And in my dream, when I was calling out for God, God didn't come to my assistance. It didn't seem like anything that would edify anybody else. It could potentially cause doubts. It could cause doubts in my own mind. So my reaction to my visionary experience was to tell nobody about it, just to live with it.
Mm.
I don't think that's the most helpful way to deal with visionary experiences. And I think that's why we need to deal with this. And that's why it's my heart to try to give some insight to others who maybe, like me, you've just held it inside, or when you've tried to share it, people just felt nervous and didn't want to talk about it. Where do you go with this thing? I'll just start off by saying, and it's similar to last week, we were talking about how to deal with others. Number one, just realize you're not crazy. Okay. Um, these experiences have been well documented in many studies taken seriously by researchers for over 50 years with near death experiences, over 130 years with deathbed experiences. Some of the top intellects have studied them, and they would say, okay, if you're having one of these experiences, you're not crazy. 4% of the US population, over 80% of the dying have experienced like near death and deathbed experiences. So you're not crazy. Let me just assure you, if you're listening to this and you've had one of these experiences, don't immediately start questioning your own sanity, because it is a common part of human experience. And then when you broaden that to say how many people in England, the United States, for example, report having seen an angel, or um, they just knew that someone else had died and had a visual experience with a deceased person, or an after death communication. We're just talking about a huge number of people here. We've just been silent about it for a generation or two. So don't think you're crazy. Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that you're correct on the sense that you don't necessarily need to think that the experience itself is abnormal in any way. Initially, I think we can get into that later down the road once we start dissecting them. But to say that you've had a near death experience is in fact a very normal thing, in terms of, if we wanted to look at it, of it's happening to 5% of the general population. And personally, I think that number is underreported. So I think it is a totally normal thing, but there is definitely this I think zeitgeist would be the right word, of where the current day church could potentially give off that feeling that something like this would be crazy.
Yes, and I think the last 150 years of the zeitgeist of naturalism in the Western world has made us feel like that and has kept us from talking about some of the most important experiences of our lives.
Mhm.
So, my second thing would be okay, don't necessarily think you're crazy. Now, you may be having some mental issues if you're experiencing these things on a regular basis. You're not at the point of death and you're just kind of thinking that you're hearing from God all the time. See a psychologist and talk about it. Find out what's going on, but deal with issues rather than just letting them sit there. I don't think that helps anybody. But secondly, reflect on them. Um, 1 Thessalonians 5 talks about this. Philippians 1 talks about depth of discernment, knowledge and depth of discernment. Think about them. Yes, this was an important concept, and you need to think through why would God have allowed me to experience this? What does it mean? Think about it. And in thinking upon it, one good way of approaching it is to study the field. Right now, I'm going through the Bible and looking at visionary experiences through the Bible. I don't know why we go through church and we hear people talking about these visions that people had, starting in Genesis. Almost every chapter talks about some kind of vision, God talking to someone, or someone seeing an angel or whatever. Um, so this is very common. Why don't we talk about, oh, are these things still happening today in some sense? But since we don't tend to, in a lot of the churches that I've been in, we feel like we're strange, it doesn't apply. But if you're a Christian, read the Bible. These experiences are quite common and you can learn a lot about them there. That's why I've written my books, is to introduce you to the whole field of study of near-death experiences and deathbed experiences, and to show you both what the field has said as far as scholarly study, and to say what does the Bible say about these things. So I think that you've got some things you can build upon as you try to understand your experience, whether it was positive or negative.
Mhm.
But the third thing I'd kind of like to camp on a little bit is talk to others about your experience. Now, this is going to take a little bit of boldness, but I find that people who've had these experiences express great relief to me when they find out that I've taken the experience seriously, I've studied it, and oh, finally, I've got somebody who understands, who I can talk to about this. Now, it may take you a few people, you may have to weed through a few people, even in your church, to find somebody who's, one, willing to thoroughly listen to your experience without cutting in with all their ideas of it. And number two, finding somebody that you can actually carry on a conversation as you think about it. Because this is something that you're going to think about over time, and you really need somebody that you can say, "Can I talk to you regularly about this?" And I'd say, "Hey, the first person is your husband or wife, or your mom and dad, or people in your own family." They may cut you off and just say, "I don't want you to ever talk about this again," because they just are uncomfortable. I understand that. But just tell them, if it's a loved one, "I need somebody to talk. This is a need of mine. I need somebody I can talk through this with. I promise I won't talk to you about it more than you're comfortable, but could I occasionally talk about my thoughts just so that I have somebody to help work this thing through with me?" That's what the family's for, and that's what the church family's for. So when I've shared with people in my church, just in general, what I'm studying, and then they look at me and say, "Oh, I've had an experience like that," then I'll get away from everybody else with them, let them talk through it, and assure them, "Hey, we can continue this conversation." It's sometimes hard for people to find folks like that, but find them. Bruce Grayson, who wrote his book, after a lifetime of study on near death and deathbed experiences. He writes this book summing it up, and he admits that the first experience he heard from a patient, something spiritual was going on, very obviously to him, but Grayson did not tell his wife, did not tell his colleagues. He kept it all inside, but determined he was going to continue to study these. I'm saying, my goodness, talk to your wife about it, okay? Talk to people because that's healthy. In the Bible, we have one another commands, uh, like encouraging one another, bearing one another's burdens. It's not just about you, but as we share our burdens with others in the church and our experiences, that gives them an opportunity to open up about their experiences and their concerns. So, what you'll find is that within your realms of influence and within your realms of trust, there are others who have had experiences that they need to talk about, but they've never had anyone they could talk about it with either. So, it's
Hmm.
not just a selfish thing of me, me, me. I need somebody to unload on. When you share those experiences with others, they open up and share,
Yeah,
and
it'll
what I
help them.
found is it becomes a mutual encouragement, it'll solidify your faith, you'll realize, "Wow, these things are happening all around us," and, so talk talk to others. That's what the church is for,
Well, and I
and
think,
that's what the family's for.
yeah, and I think ultimately to help process through those experiences and help people realize the differences between them, it's also going to be found in that group setting because when you're done in when it's done in isolation, you don't necessarily have the feedback to help you kind of process out the event. I mean, we mentioned that last week of processing the event, and I think that that's very much important that you have the opportunity to talk to someone who has an open ear to help you process the event. You know, if you have taken it in and you encountered it, being able to tell someone about it and hold nothing back. And you mentioned this, Steve, of the holding things back aspect can significantly alter the experience when you're telling someone else about it, because
Right.
we're saying in the studies a lot of times people will say they'll tell you a little bit and then see how you react, and then they'll tell you a little bit more and then see how you react, and then they start kind of
Mhm.
filling in the details as they go along. So it's like if you're too quick, if the person you're talking to is rushing to judgment too quickly, it's going to make you hold back aspects of the experience and therefore hurt your ability to process this experience. And so I think these experiences are the most impactful thing these people claim to have in the entirety of their life. And so I think it's really important that you find a place, a person who you can confide in, and like Steve says, that they are willing to take on the whole burden and not just an aspect of it, because you need that space to kind of walk out those uh, the characteristics of the experience. Like I said, in a lot of the studies that I've read, it was 5 to 7 years of people really taking time to kind of acclimate back to their life. And to me, that's processing time of them taking into consideration all the things that happened and then kind of walking that out. So I'm just kind of beating a dead horse at this point. But yes, find support, be willing to come forward with all the details, because it's important not only for them, but it's important for you.
And to bring the horse back to life and beat it one more time, I'd like to say that your family, that you see, you could just go off on an individual quest and begin reading these books and doing different things and
Mm,
talking to people out there in social media that have experienced these things. That helps. That's good. That's a start. But the thing about your family and friends is they know you. They know your tendencies in the past to either take something too far or to go in a wrong
mm.
direction
Yeah,
with
that's a
something.
good
And so
point.
you're sitting there
Yeah,
thinking,
that's a good
"Oh,
point.
God spoke to me. I must be need to be a missionary, or I
Sure,
might
sure.
need to go to seminary or something." Maybe you don't. You need people who really know you to help you through things, or you
Well,
may have a tendency toward anxiety and worry and
right.
all these things. Your friends can help you with that. This is not the Christian life is not an individual sport like pole vaulting or something. It's more like a football team that's out there doing things as a team. And so I encourage you to work together with your team that God's given you.
Pole vaulting, huh? That's the singular sport you thought of. Okay. Um, Yeah, no, totally.
It's individual. You're
Yeah,
not jumping that pole as a team.
I'm
I have
sure
to put 2 and 2 together for
all
you
the
here.
pole vaulting teams out there are now offended. Way to go, Steve. So
Okay, I'm
what
sorry.
I what I was gonna say was we brought this up last week, and I think it's relevant here again. With you brought up a good point about the tendencies I may have. Those who know me well can kind of help guard against my tendencies. And for those of you who are thinking like, well, this was the experience and God told them this, and who are you to tell them what God told them, right? Is again. Think of it like in our personal relationships in life. We can always misinterpret what someone tells us through our own personal lenses or our biases, right? And so, what we have to do is try to find others to help clarify the intentionality behind the words that we've received. And sometimes we don't get it correctly because we thought, oh, well, he was trying to insult me. When it's like, no, actually, he was trying to uplift you. It was just these words you focused in on, or maybe you have insecurities, and so therefore those insecurities are causing you to perceive things incorrectly, so on and so forth. And so there's no reason why a spiritual experience couldn't have that same type of misinterpretation happen due to these biases or these lenses that you're applying to make sense of what you encountered.
Yes, yes, very good. And I'd say additionally, empathize. Okay, so you've had this extraordinary experience. Nobody else in your family had it. They can't fully understand it. Ineffability is part and parcel of the experience. You can't express it totally. So empathize with your family, realizing, okay, they may have never had an
Right.
experience like this, thus they can't understand it totally. Now they can and so I think to sit there and expect them to listen for an hour while you talk about it, that's asking a little much, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You might need to introduce the subject and just tell them, I'm going to need to talk this thing through with somebody. Can you help me? And if you've
Mm-hmm.
got a loving spouse or a loving family, I think they'll come alongside and help if you mention it like that. If you just start talking endlessly about your experience, don't be surprised if they turn you off and are
Yeah, start
just
to tune out.
uncomfortable. But also, you're a different person. Remember, with your spouse, you are now a different person in some ways. You've not just heard about the other side, you've seen something on the other side. Your past priorities on gaining wealth and status and all this, the person that your spouse married is now a different person. Well, because your priorities are shifting. Now, your spouse may not be there. So you're going to need to talk about these things, about how maybe you don't care as much about material things as she does. So you're a little bit on a different page, and you're going to need to work through that, which takes a lot of communication. So you're different. Empathize with them, understanding they may not understand you. But I think if you ask for help, that's such a healthy thing to
Mm-hmm.
do. Uh, confess to them that you're needy. You need some help, and I think they'll listen to you. Along that line, I'd say don't jump immediately. And some people I think do this. Don't jump immediately to say, oh, God has done something special in my life. Therefore, he wants me to become a monk or go into full-time ministry or go to seminary. Maybe he does. Uh, but that again is something that you need to talk to a cross section of people about
Mm-hmm.
to find out if that's true. Don't immediately think God's calling you to something. I've seen some people who seem to want to jump to that conclusion. This is something that all kinds of people in all kinds of walks of life go through. I know George Verwer with Operation Mobilization, who knew tons of people across the world. He traveled endlessly, one of the most impactful mission organizations of our time. Sometimes he used to say, I would have somebody who was a very talented, even gifted person in the business world. That person would have a great experience with God, maybe a salvation experience or whatever. And then they'd say, oh, I don't want to go into the ministry. And they drop their
Mm.
job. And Verwer would say, oh my goodness, we need people in the business world like
Yeah.
you. We
Yeah.
need people to support these ministries. Have you considered that the best way God could use you was to continue the work you've got now?
Yeah. Totally.
So often, maybe what you were doing originally with a materialistic mindset, like making a bunch of money at your
Sure.
business,
Sure.
if you really enjoy your business and you're doing well at it, maybe God's called you to that. From what I've seen in my life, some of my greatest impact has been when I've not been in full time ministry.
Mm-hmm.
I was either in school, I was doing something else. And you know what? I was in full time ministry doing mission work. For some reason, God allowed my wife to be diagnosed with cancer. I had to pull back from that ministry and do other things to support myself. Well, if God was so concerned to maximize my time so that I could spend, you know, 16 hours a day doing ministry, he could have done it in a better way. But apparently, God thinks it's good for even like the Apostle Paul to be a tent maker, make his own living, and do his own ministry. Now you've struggled with these same things in your life. Maybe you can
Yeah.
speak to it, but don't just think immediately, "Oh, I've got to become a missionary or give up my job and do
Yeah.
something else." Maybe, but maybe not.
Yeah, I have spent a lot of time thinking about this because I am, and I'm an entrepreneur. That's how I make my money. And something like this podcast is really a hobby for me. But I will say this, that, some of my greatest reflections that have come from spending a lot of time thinking about this is that I see every field. Let me give some context. I was listening to Frank Turk one time discuss this on one of his episodes of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and he had said something that really kind of like transformed my paradigm. And he was kind of talking about how people talk about like the NFL, for example, doesn't matter, right? So like, let's say a guy in the NFL has a near-death experience, comes out, and he's like, I think I need to get into the ministry, but Steve, he pointed out, Steve, that within the NFL, it has meaning to all the people who are in the NFL and make a living off the NFL. So if you're an NFL player, like the NFL is incredibly important to you, whereas some people be like, well, it's just a game. Well, it's not just a game if you're a quarterback. I mean, it's your way of making a living, and those are real, genuine friendships and bonds you're creating within the NFL. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that people can get lost in the idea of things give people meaning, but people give things meaning, and therefore anything can have meaning if there's people involved in it. So if you're a professional gamer, if you're a professional athlete, if you're a business person, if you're a scientist, if you're a mountain climber, if you're a hiker, whatever field you do, I see it as God has sent us here on a search and rescue operation, and he has people in every tiny little pocket of the world that he wants to go get, and he's going to send his respective individuals to go there and get them. And that may mean that you're hiking in the middle of nowhere and you encounter an indigenous tribe, and God's like, look, this is why you're here, to get this tribe, to help them understand.
Mhm.
Versus another one, it might be, hey, you're a pastor of a big church, that's what I want you to do. Or in another field, it's like, hey, you're a business person and I need you to generate a really profitable business because money is needed for everything, but also there are people in this business field that I need you to have a relationship with, because they're not going to go to the churches, they're not going to go talk to the pastors, they're going to talk to you. And if you remove yourself from that position, you've removed yourself from a unique opportunity that God has placed you into to reach people that otherwise would be unreachable by the church.
Very well put. And I'm perfectly comfortable at this point teaching at a university to make my living so that I don't have to generate money through my books. I can give them away when people need them. I can, um, I think this. I'm not saying, "Oh wow, I wish a full time ministry opportunity opened up." I just think God's going to use me where I am, with my family, in my university, and in my life. Now, for some people, again, God may lead you to full time ministry, but that's not necessarily superior to whatever else God has for you.
Yeah,
Good comments on that.
I think it's all just different layers of, like, if you want to use a spiritual war as kind of your imagery, it's like, yeah, you have soldiers on the front lines, but quote unquote the front lines, but it's like they need shipments of weapons and food and logistics supply, and there's this whole back end of the war machine that if it's not all of those pieces are functioning properly, then the soldiers never is able to actually take that ground or take that soil, or the general's never able to make that move. And so, Paul speaks to this about the church being a body, and, is the foot going to be a hand, and is the hand going to be an eye, and an eye be the mouth? He's like, how well would that body work? And so I think of it as the same way of the foot is important to take the eye where it wants to go. And so is the eye important to the foot to tell it where it needs to go. Right. And to avoid thorns and thistles and this and that. So I think we can get so lost in kind of the glamorization of particular roles, like ministry, of seeing the pastors up there and winning the bodies. And it's like, no, not necessarily. I mean, as Jesus puts it in his metaphor, maybe they're doing the reaping, but they're not doing the sowing. And really, the sowing's the hardest of work. And God sees all of that, and he's going to reward the sower more than the reaper, perhaps. I don't know. But my point is, it's all important in terms of getting that person to heaven. And I don't think a single individual ever gets to heaven on their own. I think God brings a series of individuals, a series of events along in that person's life to eventually culminate to the final person who gets to do the quote unquote reaping of them kind of accepting it and coming to that conclusion that it's true, and then going from there. So it is not as simplistic as we like to think it is. And I think near-death experiences, researching them and looking at the theology, and Steve, you and I have had many a conversation about it, that it has brought me to the conclusion that relationships are the only thing you get to take to heaven. And as C.S. Lewis puts it, you've never had a conversation with a mere mortal. And that's important to know, because the most important thing you get to do is interact with people, and people are everywhere doing everything. So it doesn't really matter what thing you're doing. What matters is how you're doing it and with who you're doing it with.
Those people, those relationships are a big part of discernment as to what your gifts are and how God wants to
Yeah,
use you.
totally.
There are a lot of people that say, "Oh, I want to go into ministry," and so they go to seminary. And I'm like, "Okay, well, has anybody in your church told you that they think you have a gift for, speaking and pastoring and all this? If not, you may not have the gifts. Going to seminary won't give you the gift necessarily. So get close to people in your church, get close to people in your family, and it's not
For
just a matter of me and God and feeling led, like some people say. Yeah, that can be a part of it, but get input from others. Also, I mentioned last week in relation to helping others, if you have had an experience to where it's come to you in a vivid dream, or it's come to you that you just know somebody is about to die, crisis apparitions, some of these are kind of beforehand. This is one we mentioned that Mark Twain had concerning his brother. He
mm,
actually kind of saw the funeral beforehand. My wife had such an event where she saw her grandmother in a funeral situation. Some people and some of my students who have had that now look back and wonder, oh my goodness, maybe God was trying to tell me to warn them about something so they wouldn't be murdered, or they wouldn't drown, or this wouldn't happen. Uh, I, I would just encourage you that God loves you. God is a smart God, and He knows how to tell you, warn someone not to go on that ship, that
mm-hmm,
cruise ship.
mm-hmm.
He knows how to do that. We are just sheep, according to Psalm 23. We've got a shepherd. Trust him to make things like that clear. If he wanted you to do something specific, to warn someone or to do whatever, he could have let you know. So all the time, I pray for God's wisdom. I pray for his guidance. I don't spend a lot of time looking in the rearview mirror saying, oh my goodness, did I make the right decision? Did I say the right thing? I'm just a sheep. I'm depending on God to lead me, and so I don't do a lot of worrying about those things in the past. So if he had a vision, I don't get the impression talking to these people who have had such visions of the future, um, crisis apparitions, things that I deal with under deathbed experiences. I don't see it that God was trying to get them to prevent something. God could have prevented it. He could have told them to prevent it. don't go there. I just think it's not a profitable thing to
Mm,
worry about.
okay.
I'd also say don't expect this to be a regular, normal way that God's going to talk to you in the future.
Hmm.
Typically, what I'm seeing,
Mm,
even in the Bible, you look at the book of Acts, there were times when God gave him a vivid dream, like the Macedonian call to come out and reach them, or he came down in a vision to the Apostle Paul. It wasn't like an everyday normal thing.
mhm,
Even with the Apostle Paul, even looking at Abraham, that guy lived a long time. And it wasn't regularly that God, like every day part of their devotional life, as if Abraham was this super spiritual person that was literally hearing from God every day. So don't expect that this is a normal way God is working, but it's a typical thing. It is normal in the sense that people have had these once in a lifetime experiences. Don't expect it to be the normal way that God guides you to where you're seeking an experience like this in the future. The dangers of this are that's when people often get into the occult, consulting mediums. They're wanting to relive this experience or expecting to conjure it up themselves. I see these as passive things that God does when we're not expecting them, not the normal way of his guidance. Anything else you'd say on that?
yeah, you mentioned in the past, and I think this is a good thing to point out here, is that there can be a draw towards worshiping the experience and not the information that it gave,
Mm,
and then seeking out the experience and not God. Because I think you can absolutely experience God in many ways, these visions being one of them. But like you mentioned, there has been a tendency of some folks to get so locked in on the experience and have a pridefulness about it, of like, oh well, I'm special because God chose
mm.
me to have this vision. And I've definitely read some near death experiences where that vibe comes off heavily in the book, and it's really hard to read, because you can't tell like what's true and what's kind of their pride interpreting something as true. And so I would say, like, in these situations, be very mindful that the experience was just a vehicle for a message, and that God has many vehicles by which to communicate those messages to you.
Very good point, good clarification on that. Uh, integrate this with your worldview. We talked about Philippians 1, knowledge. Paul was praying that they would have knowledge and depth of discernment. A lot of our problems in living life is that we don't go for a depth of enough discernment as to what experiences like this mean, what's their
Mm-hmm.
nature, why do people have them, how do they have them, how do we minister to them. Now, Charlie and I might be kind of in an extreme here in that we're reading book after book, looking into things in greater depth than a lot of people would, but some people are so shallow in their Christian faith.
Mm-hmm.
And we're ready, we just want things spoon-fed. Don't make me read something or
Mm-hmm.
listen to a audio book on it, just tell me what I need to know in a short 5-minute social media clip, and then I can
Mm.
go on. But there's value in look at Proverbs 2 about wisdom. Wow, he couldn't have presented wisdom in loftier terms than that. Seek wisdom, seek knowledge. I believe one of the main outcomes for you, if you've had an experience like this, is to begin seeking. Seeking nothing. Speaking of wisdom, Proverbs says, "Nothing you desire can compare with her." There are a lot of things we could desire: a nice house, a beautiful woman, this or that. And he says, "No, no, no, nothing. Nothing you desire even compares with wisdom." So I'll challenge you, go deeper into this. Study the word, study the knowledge that's out there. Deepen yourself rather than being a shallow believer who really doesn't understand much about their faith. And you're going to need a deep foundation if you're going to navigate issues that you face in life.
Isn't
You need that firm foundation.
Steve, doesn't the word philosopher mean lover of wisdom?
I believe so. Philos
Yeah.
and philosophius. Yeah.
Lover of
So a
wisdom.
lover of wisdom. I mean, do you really? Some people like wisdom, they're intrigued by wisdom, but how many really love wisdom?
Mm.
Wow. Good point. Good point.
I think
Integrate
that's
with your worldview.
that's a Christian. I think that's fundamentally a Christian concept. Is that if you want to be a good Christian, then in a sense you need to be a good Christian philosopher, and not that you have to be a lofty ivory tower, thinker or anything like that. It's just like Steve's saying is take these opportunities to seek out clarification and use the Bible. Even if you don't, if even if you think the Bible is just a bunch of sheep herders writing some stuff down and none of it's really relevant, I don't see how you could disregard its tenets of wisdom, because it does have such
Wow.
high
Yeah.
levels of tenets of wisdom. So if you do consider yourself a person who loves being wise and loves seeking out clarity and understanding, then the Bible is one of the best books ever written on the topic.
I think it's the best. And I think that that leads us into my final point, which flows right out of that, growing in wisdom, but grow as a believer. Grow as a believer. Back to that Philippians 1 passage you talked about. Let your love abound more and more in all knowledge and depth of perception. So more and more, this grow in it. The Christian life was not meant to be something where you have this experience going from darkness to light, and then you just kind of endure the rest of your life until you get to heaven. No, it's an exciting experience, relationship with God that's a growth experience. And I don't know with you, but with me, I'll read I mean, I've read the Bible for how many years now? I mean, this was 1973 when I made a commitment to Christ. And now I'll be reading the Bible and think, wow, I've just never seen it like this before. It's
Sure.
just wonderful. So I have a devotion with my wife. I have my personal times with the Lord. These are personal devotions where if you're just kind of doing the hunt and peck method where you just put your finger on a verse and read it, go beyond that. You need context. Read through the Bible this year.
Hmm.
Read through the New Testament a couple of times first if you've never done that. Read the Gospels, read things in their context and understand them, and that'll answer so many of the doubts and questions you have that are thrown at you, because many of the things that skeptics throw at us are really scriptures taken out of context. It's
Yeah.
one verse that looks weird in it without a context,
Yeah.
but then in the context of the whole Bible, you say, "Oh, I understand why God does things like this." Get into the Bible, get into prayer. Personally, I mean, I'm at a point in my spiritual life where I'm driving along the car and I'm talking to God. The Bible talks about pray without ceasing. And I'm just kind of continually in an attitude of prayer about things.
Mm.
And I'll be talking to one of my sons about something. I'll say, man, we need to pray about that. Hey, God, please help us to get understanding of this. I'll just break out into a prayer. It's just a very natural part of my life. But I'm continuing to grow. Don't just go to a big church gathering. You need to be involved in some type of small group experience where you're growing together with other people. It's almost like an Alcoholics Anonymous group. I mean, these people that are getting off alcohol, trying to be sober, they get together in small groups. You see them meeting in churches and places all over the community because they know they need each other.
Hmm.
That's what the small group experience in a church is supposed to be. If the one you're in isn't working like that, you're not really developing relationships, you don't really like the people that are in the group, go find another group. There's thousands of them around. Find something to where you're in a group of people that hit it off and you can keep each other accountable and growing. So grow. If you've had one of these experiences, grow in your spiritual life. And then you'll see that experience in the context of your growth. And that will help you to learn to deal with it, understand why it happened, and especially how God wants you to continue to grow as a result, as a logical outcome of that experience.
Yeah, seek intimacy with everything that you possibly can. I think that if you feel that you're gaining an intimacy in these relationships, that you are doing it correctly.
Very good point. And really, that's what I wanted to say to people. If you've had these experiences, you don't know where to go with them, and there's a Facebook group called, I believe it's called Jesus and the Near Death Experience. You might want to go online and meet some other believers who have had experiences like this to where you can talk about it. Those can help. But I think all these areas of growth can help you to come out with the full meaning of what God wants you to do with your life following such an experience. And it's not easy for a lot of people. I understand that. That's why we're doing this episode.
Yeah, and why we'll continue to keep doing these episodes, because it is a topic that needs more help. I'll say that, both on all sides, right? The experiencer as well as the support group and the academic side. These experiences are, there's a lot to tackle, and there's a lot of misinformation out there about what can be drawn from these experiences, and unfortunately a lot of that is the more popular information, and therefore it creates these caricatures of near death experiences and the people who go through them and kind of what they end up becoming afterward.
Very good. Thank you so much for letting us address this issue. And if you've got comments, make some comments under this talk and let us know what you think about what we need to tell people, how what to advise for people. What's helped you after you had your experience?
Yeah, that's a great point. Definitely comment below if you guys have had these experiences and you feel like you need to reach out. I know Steve is always giving out his personal information to folks who want to talk to him. So know that there are people out there who are ready and willing to hear you guys out. And if you find this episode helpful, send it to someone who may have had an experience and they feel, they need some help of kind of like, how do I work through this? How do I digest this information and get to a point where I can merge this experience I had with the life I'm living now? So send this to them if you think that'll help them. And feel free, as always, if you guys disagree, of course, comment in the comment section below. And always, Steve and I will dedicate time to debating with you and walking it back and forth. And we want to create further dialogue around this. So we welcome all comments and look forward to seeing you guys in the next episode. So in the meantime, it won't be next week. It will be the week after, just so you guys know. Steve's going to be out of town. So, but in the meantime, don't worry. We'll keep dropping content on here, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. So until then, God bless and goodbye.